Hi, Chris McClune here with Fire Apparatus and Emergency Equipment. Welcome to this episode of our podcast. My guest today is Kevin Sofen. Many people know him for all the different things he's got his hands in throughout the industry, all relating to technology. However, in this case, I'm talking to him as a technical advisor to us. He was a big part of two things this year at FDIC International 2025. One was the NextGen Fire Rescue Tech Summit, and then there were breakouts that were billed as the NextGen Tech, and they were in the Lucas Oil Stadium as part of the Lucas Oil experience. There was a lot of technology at FDIC this year. Kevin had his hands in a bunch of it. I also, in a number of the podcasts that I did during the show, a number of them revolved around technology. So, Kevin, thank you very, very much for joining me today. What got me, what made me think I got to have him on was actually an article that you wrote on LinkedIn. First of all, I did not know that was your 12th FDIC, which you mentioned in that article. So that was like a whoa. But also, you mentioned a number of things in there that I wanted to touch on because I do think that they're important. You had kind of laid out a few points. But before we jump into that part of it, how did both those things go for you at the show this year? This is the first time we tried them. So, but my understanding is they went pretty well. But I wanted to get your impression as well.
Well, Chris, thank you for the opportunity to be here. Longtime listener, first time caller here on the podcast. So I appreciate the opportunity. And yeah, the NextGen Tech Summit this year was awesome. It was something that's been in the works for a couple of years, and with the leadership of Lauren, Stephanie, and Eric and the rest of the team, wanting to do something to bring technology to the forefront, not just kind of having the technology at the booth. And of course, you walk around FDIC, it's a show floor of technology, but more so kind of wanting to build an experience around that through content, through sessions, as well as kind of in the field experiences. And so I'm pretty hard on myself, and I kind of was like going into it thinking like, gosh, I don't know, I hope it's going to be okay. But I would give it in the year one like an 89.5, and that rounds up to an A-. So I think it was pretty good with some good room to build on. But I mean, the morning was filled. So it was a full day thing, half day in the morning. And we had Tom Jenkins speaking about NARIS and data exchange. We had Chad Krause and Scott Roseberry talking about artificial intelligence, with Stefan Truthen talking about smart cities and examples from Berlin. We had Kevin Fetterman from Orange County talking about common operating pictures. We had Jeff Pritchard talking about drones. We had Sarah Jonke talking about technology adoption. Mike Cox and Josh Piercy talking about search and rescue tech. It was all 20-minute sessions. And the thing with that was like trying to give 20-minute snippets about who, what, when, where, why, case studies, problem solutions of technology in the field. And I saw that a lot of people enjoyed that. I mean, one thing we wanted to prevent was just person on stage with PowerPoint, just drinking from a fire hose type vibe. So within 20 minutes, it was sort of kind of teaspoon type presentation experiences. But then what people really liked, we had about an hour or so where we broke into 4 different groups around the key sessions and just allowed people to talk in a circle about AI, about common operating pictures, about smart cities. And that really and we had facilitators for that, and those were awesome. And the worst thing about it was having to break it up and end it, because then we had to take buses to the Indy Fire Training Academy, which is really where the fun began. And that's where we had technology out in the field. It's funny that there's that phrase of man plans and God laughs. And it was probably about as bad of weather as you could have asked for. Where it was just cold and rainy and mildly miserable standing outside, but that was kind of real world examples of technology out there. So there was a lot of really cool tech from some drones from Paladin and Skydio, some different robotic solutions from Rosenbauer in their electric vehicle, and just seeing technology out in the wild and kind of using it, showing it, and allowing people to kind of stand by there, touch it, feel it. In future years, we're going to do more of hey, this is a real life scenario and let's bring technology with us, as opposed to being just like, here's a scenario. But it allowed people to see the technology being used in the wild. And I always think it's important to where, yeah, you could, again, like go to school and you could read a bunch of books, you could watch a bunch of videos, but like it's never the same until you like actually touch it, feel it, experience it, burn it, break it, blow it up. And we very much did that. Even with the weather, people were troopers, and it was just it felt kind of like when we were on the bus, like we were going on like a field trip and we were in elementary school. So that was awesome. And we had Firehouse subs. And then afterwards, we then went to the Sun King Brewery, just kind of kept the vibes going and the networking. And overall, it was just a good opportunity to learn about technology concepts in the morning and then translate that through these awesome sponsors that were kind of showcasing their technology in the field. And then at the Sun King Brewery, kind of, culminated into, again, just like problem, solution, ideas, how else can I build on that? And so I think it checked all the boxes. And then further to that, throughout the Thursday, Friday, Saturday, throughout the exhibition time, Kirk McKenty and I had coordinated, I think, around like 16 or so panels. And there was panels on AI, wearables, drones, everything that was talked about earlier. And those were awesome. I mean, it was just a good chance to have 4 thought leader experts talking about it. And so those ones we could go deep into each individually, but those were all recorded and those will be made available. And just cool to, put smart people on stage and learn from them.
Well, one of the things you mentioned was, and it's funny that you brought that up, because I actually found myself saying the same thing several times. As I said, I had done some podcasts during the week. A lot of them had to do with technology, and I would always ask them, okay, what are people who are here going to see at your booth? Because it really is one of those things where technology can be this very, very ethereal, kind of aloof kind of thing. But when you can get your hands on that piece of technology, that is really, really where, the eyes open up, the light bulbs come on over your head and stuff like that. And it's a critical thing, to be able to touch it and feel and all that, because I've always said that, and I think it was with you at another event one time, that when firefighters can immediately see the value that a piece of technology is going to bring to them, I don't think there is any barrier toward adoption, outside of maybe cost in the beginning. But when they see that value and they see how it can help them to do their jobs more efficiently, I mean, it's right away. So that was, I think, a critical part of what you were bringing to the table this year was that part where they could get that hands-on with the technology to experience it. But one thing you also talked about in your LinkedIn article was that one of the keys to adoption is keeping it simple. And I'd like to take it even, one step further, where that simplicity, like when we're on the scene, we need to press the button and it needs to work. We can't be sitting there trying to troubleshoot 1,000 things when there's a major incident going on around us. So, I think that, I'm curious about, you elaborating on what made you come to that conclusion that one of the keys is adoption is keeping it simple. Cause I really do think that is a critical component of this. Sometimes when something is introduced technology wise, it is not simple. So just talk a little bit about what led you to that takeaway.
Thank you, Chris. And yeah, I had the fortune of working alongside WS Darling Company now for 13 years, and now with Ascent Integrated Tech, which is a startup that's been integrating smartwatches in the public service. And being on both sort of a distributor side, the manufacturer side, and nonprofit side, I've seen these different ways of how industry is bringing technology to market. And there's always this kind of idea from industry of like, they bring something new and it's like, here's this thing, it's cool, you should buy it. But the first responders are like, okay, well, that's cool, but what does it do for me? And if I'm going to spend 10 grand, 50 grand, whatever that number is on new tech, it better work. And B, I need to figure out how I'm going to actually implement it. So there's that whole conversation of how am I actually going to implement this new technology after I buy it? And if it doesn't have an NFPA standard around it, and if it's not something that's been in the market for a decade plus, it better be something that is stupid simple. It just works. And I've seen working with virtual reality technology, drones, and now more so with wearables, if it truly isn't open out of the box, plug it in, or just turn it on and works, it doesn't work. Like, the chance of the firefighters actually using it is close to zero. And fire service, it's sort of that phrase of like, they don't care how the sausage is made. They just want the sausage. And so
Mm.
I've seen industries sometimes too, where they'll throw out these terms like, oh, artificial intelligence and large language learning models and blah, 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 this, blah, 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 blah. Like, don't care. Doesn't matter. Like, what I care about is like, does the thing A, work, and B, how is it helping me make better decisions? How is it saving me time? And actually, on that note, I was talking with Peter Decker from FLIR. And when I was talking to him about infrared cameras, he was kind of talking about it. And I was like, Peter, FLIR doesn't sell infrared cameras. FLIR sells time. FLIR saves you time. And I think from an industry perspective of continuing to simplify like that message, that's critical, because at times, again, like these other features don't care. Yeah, it's good to have on the spec sheet. And then to the simplicity of it, you mentioned needing to press a button and work. Heck, even needing to press a button during the heat of the moment, that's a big deal. And I know with the Indiana University First Responder Tracking Challenge, there was a lot of these technologies looking into Z-axis where you had to press a button and calibrate it when you got on scene. If you're a firefighter going to scene and you're wearing your equipment, the last thing you're thinking about once you get out of the truck is, you know what? Maybe I should stand here and calibrate my device really quick. So I think that's, I've learned a lot from Alec Gorsuch, the CTO of Ascent Integrated Tech, where it's got to be simple. It's just got to be on your wrist. Like, for example, with their smartwatches, like it's just got to be on your wrist. It's got to work, and you can't even think about it, And if you're doing anything else and needing to press buttons or connectivity, it's just like it's most likely not going to work. And you've seen that. I've seen that with robots and in VR, where if it doesn't just work, the chance of it actually being adopted is close to zero. Granted, it is important from a fire service to have a little bit of tolerance with new tech, to know that it's not going to be perfect right away. It is going to take a little bit of time. But yeah, I think that most of the fire service would agree, if it's not PPE and if it's not something that's already existed, the standards for over a decade, it better be simple, or else it's just going to be something that maybe one department buys and it just gets a bad name and no one really uses it because it's just not truly scalable and usable across the fire service.
And that really is critical. And I can certainly think of things during my career that we gave a go to, but because it didn't have that simplicity, it was just not something that we went back to. We may have seen the value in it, but because it wasn't exactly usable, we didn't go back to it. You mentioned something during your answer there. You were talking about, some of those terms that get thrown out. One of them is artificial intelligence, and we hear a lot about that in the fire service right now. And I mean, I'm on the media side of the business. We hear about AI being used for certain things in my industry. And I'm curious just what you mentioned AI just now. You also mentioned it in your LinkedIn article. I'm just curious about where you're seeing it used right now. Is it being used by departments? You said you've also been on, the distributor side of things. Is it being used by some of our industry suppliers, and how is it being used? It sounds like something, often that's very difficult. In my previous in a previous job, I worked for a machine vision publication, and AI is being used there. Deep learning is being used. And, it is something that sounds very complicated and very complex. Yet at a trade show, I was able to put together an AI model for part inspection in a matter of minutes. So it's not actually as hard as some might think it is. But just curious about where you're seeing it used by the fire service right now, and maybe by some of our suppliers.
Yeah, for sure. And I had a mentor of mine maybe 3 years ago. He told me, Kevin, if you're not using AI in every single aspect of your day and learning how to do it, you are behind. You need to figure it out. And when he told me that, I was like, okay, I need to really further evaluate again how I'm considering and using AI responsibly. And of course, it's a kind of a Pandora's box right now. If you're listening to Google John Oates, I mean, everyone probably knows him from IPSDI. he has a lot of really good talks about the ethics of AI and the sense making of AI, and really how can we be intentional about how to include AI within how the fire service operates. And there's a lot of stuff that AI can do from us, from a fire service perspective, in terms of automating some of the easy stuff. But in terms of decision making and kind of just assuming that AI will kind of take over, I mean, that's still if you don't have good data in, it's going to be bad data out. And if we don't even know how we're doing certain stuff, how can AI know how we're doing certain stuff? So John says it much more eloquently than me, and he has some stuff online. So I encourage you to check that out. But during the sessions, Chad Kraus from St. Lucia Fire Department and Scott Roseberry from Garland, they are both practitioners of AI, and they're both active battalion chiefs right now. And they are both using ChatGPT in a variety of ways. And two examples that I thought was just kind of simple and pragmatic. One is, hey, we need to get a press release out to the public for something that just happened, whether it's a flood or whether it's an active shooter or something. And not only that, heck, we have a Spanish-speaking population that, in this area, and we don't have anyone that's fluent in Spanish. And not only that, we need to do it as a radio alert. And so at real time, he opened up ChatGPT and was like, hey, I need to create a press release about this flood happening on 37th and Oak Street. And it's happening right now. And you need to be prepared to divert and, take these proper precautions. It does it. It creates a written one, a spoken one. And then it's like, okay, now do it in Spanish. Boom. Happened in real time. And it was like, wow, it was just something that was very simple, very practical, very useful, and something that could be used today. I also saw another cool example of with leveraging drone photography. If you are kind of looking at crowd management, one really simple example is if you are flying your drone and you have kind of this angle here and the crowd is kind of at like a plane of 45 degrees below you, being able to take some photos and then take that photo and upload it to chat and say, how many people are in this photo? And then chat real time takes this whole calculation of based on the amount of people and the square footage and all this and again, nerd speak, who I wouldn't even know what to begin to speak the calculation. And it gives a pretty good approximation of based on all this, there's 4,655 people here. And you're like, okay, that's really helpful information. Another example from Will Brocious in Charlottesville, Charlotte Fire Department. He was telling me how he was using it to kind of help forecast based on all his sort of numbers and financials and the amount of trucks that he has and the amount of trucks he needs to buy and the types of trucks and the years, using it to help create a model around his maintenance schedule. And again, it's not that it's 100% just doing this for him. It's it's kind of just doing some of the heavy legwork. Sometimes when you're just staring at a blank screen and you're just oh gosh, where do I start? This is a big lift. But AI in a lot of ways is it's an ideation partner. It's helps you go from 0 to 1, and it's not doing the whole thing. But Will was it just helped me get started. And then I needed to go in and tweak it and double check the numbers and run it by my command staff and everything. But he then was able to do something that probably would have maybe taken a full week or two and did it in less than half a day. And so I think those were really cool first responder use cases. And then for me, I'm, quasi industry and nonprofit. I use AI every day. And some examples of how I use it and how industry can use it is record your calls. If the person's allowing you to record it, take the transcript, chuck it into ChatGPT and say, hey, based on this conversation, what were the 3 main takeaways? And then based on that, what are some ideas on how I could better serve this customer? What is a blog post and a podcast I could create based on this conversation? What are the biggest gaps that I have from an industry, where I'm missing a mark? I mean, you can just kind of play Monday morning quarterback on your conversation. That's how I use it, all the time. And then I also use it again, just as a starting point. Probably another fun thing that, industry can use it as is just creating images that aren't boring. Granted, it's pretty obvious to tell when ChatGPT creates an image. It's also very obvious to know if ChatGPT has written everything. So sometimes you'll see industry just all of a sudden they just discovered chat and they're like, oh my gosh, check out this post. And you see these posts and it's so cringeworthy. Having said that, again, they're figuring it out. But it's very obvious to know when chat or AI has done everything. And I think we're just evolving the world from an industry side of how can you include, just like with the fire service, AI as a tool to help you do your job better, faster, safer. It is not replacing. It is only supplementing you to, again, just be able to take in more data and analyze it more effectively so you can ideally bring more value to the fire service.
And I compare that with like a thermal imaging camera. When we train with a thermal imaging camera, we are never ever abandoning the skills that we developed for search and rescue without that camera. It's just a way to help us do our jobs, like you just said, more efficiently. And AI is going to be a tool. It gets a bad rep sometimes, but most of the time, it like you said, it's a tool to help us
And
make
for the
our job.
record, it does. AI also terrifies me when I sometimes take all this data and then I ask it the question and I put it in and he just starts doing it. I'm like, that literally used to take me a day, and now I'm like doing it in 2 minutes. And I don't know if anyone or if you've watched Black Mirror. It's a Netflix show, but it's a little sci-fi, but it's also there's stuff that I look at it. I'm like, that stuff's possible today. And my wife hates the show. I can't get enough of it, but it really, if you're into technology and a little sci-fi, Black Mirror is something that I use it kind of expands your mind with thinking about kind of all of the terrible things that technology inclusion into our life could do. So again, with all this stuff, we just need to be incredibly intentional about how we integrate any tech, particularly AI, just because you can't just assume it's going to do everything right. If you don't create the proper guardrails, like, I mean, look at humans, like we're driven by greed and lust in certain ways, not all of us, but throughout history, a lot of times. And that's why, the idea of governance exists. That's why rules exist. And we need to be just as intentional as we have with humans as we are with any level of this new powerful technology, particularly AI.
I wanted to talk about wearables a little bit, and I guess one of the things you mentioned was that they are becoming more useful. I want to talk about that, but I also want to talk about what wearables are considered, because most of the time when I think of wearables, I immediately think of like a T-shirt that has sensors on it, or sensors inside the PPE that's monitoring your breathing, monitoring your heart rate, stuff like that. But wearables, that term actually collects a lot more than just sensors and such that are integrated into a garment. So I wanted to talk first about what define wearables for the audience.
Well, within the IFC, there's a tech council, and within the tech council, there's a subcommittee on wearables. And that's funny. It actually has been a conversation of what is a wearable. And there was conversations of, is an Apple Vision Pro that I wear on my head, this sort of AR, VR system, is that a wearable? I wear it on my head. And then if you look at the research roadmap to the future of smart firefighting, there's a whole section on wearables. And there's all different types of wearables that they're kind of dreaming up. One that I still think about, I don't know if it exists on the market, but it's a wearable that you would put on your outside of your PPE that is it's green, and if it goes yellow or red, it's sort of detecting potential chemical exposure. The other idea is heat exposure, especially if you have this industrial PPE. You don't even know how hot it is on the outside, but if all of a sudden you have this wearable that goes from green to red, there might be some companies in the market doing that. But so there's that kind of wearable. And then there's this kind of wearables in your wrist. I'm not wearing any wearables, but then there's, this is my wedding ring, but the idea of a ring wearable, you've seen Aura rings been a big thing. And, granted, some major industry players from Samsung and Apple who wear smartwatches. And I feel like there's all these different wearable conversations, but what I'm seeing from both the defense side and the civilian side and public safety side is wearables as smartwatches. And you think too, I mean, granted, like, here's my cell phone. Everyone pretty much has their cell phone glued to them. And your cell phone can do a lot for you. But still, there's some limitations with cell phones where sometimes when you think of cell phones, like, what do you use your cell phone for? Particularly if it's for, if you're thinking about from a public safety perspective, like, if I'm a firefighter, like I use my cell phone to, take pictures of my dog and send it to my wife, and or I call my grandma, or like cell phones don't really fully have that. Like I'm using this for an operational use case. Granted, there is the evolution of having the cell phone multi-purpose use cases, and you are seeing more of that. But wearables, particularly smartwatches, is something that you're seeing more people where they're like, if there's something on my wrist, that means like work. That means something I could, be used that could be used for operations in some capacity. So you're seeing a couple companies now including wearables for a range of uses. So, three that come to mind. One is a company called FireHUD. Excuse me. Now they're Slate Safety, but they're purely for physiological alerting for industrial use cases. Ease Alert is one that's doing it where it's wearables for bedside station alerting, where if you, as opposed to having these audible alerts, it's sort of a haptic wristwatch alert. And then Ascent Integrated Tech, where they're using a Samsung watch, which is giving you insights about the health and heart rate of an individual, as well as location tracking. And so all these different wearables are great, and I'm a big fan of all of those companies. But I think the challenge with all this stuff, technology, it's wonderful. The whole thing of, again, it needs to be simple. It's sort of like that data is being created. Cool. Now, what are you doing with it? And that data needs to be transmitted somewhere. And then that someone needs to take that data and do something with it. And for example, Ascent is taking COTS hardware from Samsung, and then taking the location tracking and the physiological alerting, and then transmitting that to government off-the-shelf software, TAC, which is developed by the Air Force Research Lab, and then just making it so if there are 20 people out in the field, I can know where their X, Y, and Z location is, and I can know if someone has a heart rate that exceeds a threshold, and I have just a tablet that just shows me dots moving on the screen. And if someone's threshold is hit from a physiological alerting perspective, I get an alert as an incident commander. And that's really, again, leads to the simple part where you can't have cognitive overload. If you do, then the tech is making the job harder. And so with, again, the wearables now, the key has been simplicity, low cost and effective hardware, leveraging off-the-shelf government-made software. There are a lot of other industry players that are making private industry common operating pictures, and there's a lot of great ones out there too that the stuff integrates to. But it's still, I think a lot of it comes down to simplicity. A lot of it comes down to, again, the wearable needs to be robust, durable. And I did give a presentation at FRI last year, and one of the things that I asked people in the audience was like, who here would use a cell phone for operations? And most people were like, no, I wouldn't do it, to the points I mentioned earlier. But who here would use a watch, especially if that watch did more than one thing? And I think that's a really important thing, that the smartwatch needs to do more than just one thing, especially if it's new. If the standard doesn't exist, that watch needs to do more than one thing. I had a room of like 75 people all raise their hand. And so you're seeing it now more so with the defense community, more so with the fire community now, and police as well, embracing that a smartwatch can be used to create situational awareness in a way that wasn't before. And it's also now come to the point where you're not talking like tens and hundreds of thousands of dollars. Like you're talking, a couple $100 per person to be able to know where my people are, how they're doing, or, again, to have station alerting. So I'm personally very bullish on wearables and smartwatches and fire service. And I think just like drones are now becoming commonplace for every department, I think, as well as virtual reality is becoming more common in a lot of use cases. I think drones and VR are kind of now becoming more of a thing and stable, and everyone gets it. I think smartwatches and wearables are that next thing that are just going to become normal and commonplace in the next 1 to 5 years.
Two questions based on that. One is, do you think that the smartwatch was kind of the missing link to all this? And second, how far away do you think we are to seeing this to seeing this really rolled out on a more widespread basis to the extent of the way drones are now?
Yeah, I do think smartwatches were that link, and it's always that kind of was it Moore's law and the technology curve of just the tech getting to the point where it's scalable enough and cost effective. I think a lot of people go to the gym and they've had that heart rate monitor, and just sometimes putting something on your chest is a little bit intrusive. And again, like slapping something on your wrist is just easy. And I think that's a big thing of just sort of like the simplicity part of it. And so I think that's a big thing. And then, and sorry, the second part of your question, what was that?
Oh, is how close? How
Yeah.
close are we to seeing this like rolled out really in a widespread way?
Yeah. I mean, based on the conversations that I've had with Slate Safety, Ease Alert, Ascent Integrated Tech, they're all startups that are starting to, make some money. And that's because industry is in the fire service is buying the products. And so I think, again, my opinion doesn't matter. I'm more of just like, I believe the market is the market is the market, and the market is starting to respond in the way that they're embracing smartwatches and wearables as a means to create new insights and deliver more, again, safety solutions for first responders, whether that's, with physiological alerting, location tracking to station alerting. These are all just features that are continuing to become baked into the everyday life of how firefighters operate. And I think everyone can kind of agree that anything that we can do to help make firefighters' jobs safer and more effective, and if there are ways that we can have better insights in terms of where they are, how they're doing, and that we all know too, unfortunately, the largest driver of line of duty deaths has been cardio related. So I think anything we can do to continue to have better operational insights into the physiological awareness of our people, it's a very preventable way to, again, this firefighter has to go to rehab ASAP. And because some of these heart attacks are happening, 6, 12 hours after the scene, but it's sort of like go home and don't know what's up. So I'm encouraged. And again, there's this, whenever you see some of these LODDs, it just breaks your heart. And to me, it's exciting about how this is a technology that works. It's, Samsung and Apple, particularly Samsung, are the manufacturers. Like, they're one of the biggest manufacturers in the world. Like, everyone trusts their technology, and now it's being made easy. And one of the other big things I will say that's an important point is that these watches also have standalone LTE in them. So some watches, you do need to pair Bluetooth to your phone, and that is okay, but it's another step. And so just being able to have a standalone watch that you don't have to do anything with, is something that to me is encouraging, because it's just something that is one less step of complexity that allows that data to then be tracked and transmitted to an incident commander who can make a decision to hopefully understand if you're, need help or not.
One of the things that struck me in the article that you wrote on LinkedIn was that the fire service is open to change. And that it struck me because, I mean, within the last 2 years, you and I have both been in sessions and in discussions where we were trying to determine what the stumbling block was to the fire service adopting technology. What was the resistance to using technology? There have been, I've heard countless times that, we cannot continue to fight fires the way we were in 1995 because we have all this technology now. And there's always the but, the fire service, this, that, and the other thing. But at FDIC, through, your own conversations, through the different sessions that you were involved with, through the summit, you came to the conclusion that the fire service is open to change. And I'm just curious about, could you cite some examples from FDIC that drove you to that conclusion?
Chief Dan Muncie from San Bernardino, talks about this a lot, and he shows this video. It's from like early 1900s of a horse-drawn carriage arriving on some scene, and then just the idea of putting wet stuff on the red stuff. And granted, the mechanisms of how we fight fires in a lot of ways has changed, but kind of the principle of going from fire department to going to the call, and then firefighters going in and saving the people and putting the wet stuff on the red stuff, like a lot of this is the same concepts, but a lot of the kind of the nuances and the principles of kind of how the fire service continues to deliver services to the community and continue to protect the community at large has evolved quite a bit. And I think everyone can agree that firefighter life and safety is the utmost important thing, and any line of duty death is unacceptable. So I think you've seen that over time with technology now being introduced to the fire service. And you hear that phrase, and I know it's sort of like, for Harry Potter lovers, it's like saying Voldemort, but it's like 100 years of tradition unimpeded by progress. Like, I really don't buy that. And I think most people would agree in that you've seen a lot of change. It just happened slower than we normally would expect. And Dr. Sarah Jonke, who's kind of like my fairy godmother in the fire industry. If you don't know her and you don't know Science Alliance and Science at the Station, Google it. She's awesome. If you're interested in research, please reach out to her. But she spoke at the NextGen Fire Tech Rescue Summit, and she talked about how she had this conversation with her dad, and her dad talked about how, I forget exactly, but it might have been like 1980s, early 1990s, and the idea was like, I got this idea. We should put an AED on every fire truck. And all the other firefighters looked at him and was like, that is the dumbest idea I've ever heard. And they laughed him out of the room. And now it's sort of like, yeah, it sounded dumb. And then a couple years later, after you have a change maker, like all of a sudden it's like, boom, commonplace. Same thing with FLIR infrared cameras. It was like, too expensive, not practical. Now it's everyone's using it. And it's something that's, in your hand, or it's built into even to your headset. And so I think, especially if it's something new that doesn't have a standard, there's that, I think it's a Steve Jobs quote or something like, we overestimate what we can do in a year, we underestimate what we can do in a decade. And it's the same with change. It's just like, you want something to happen today in a year, but like it's a bunch of small things, and change does take time. And Gary Breeze talks a lot about too, one of the challenges is that we need to shorten the amount of time it takes to not just buy tech, but to train on the technology. So with these IFSTA manuals and all the training technologies, so we can train on it and know how to use it faster. Like if that takes 10 years, like how do we make the time to learn to implement the training documents to train on it from 10 years to 3 years? Like that's the challenge I have to everyone listening. And I think that's a big breakthrough. And again, so like AEDs, FLIR, you're seeing wearables. And again, probably the other biggest ones is drones and VR. And you ask a fire chief, who was I talking to? Gosh, I'm blanking on his name, but fire chief from Philadelphia, talking about the idea of, I like having a drone because it allows me to see the Charlie side of the building, and I don't have to think about it. And I can just pop the drone up and I just can get insights on it. And if you have a drone and you can know where the hotspots are, where your people are deployed, you've got this eye in the sky, and it gives you an unfair advantage over the fire, why would you not do that? And I think you're now just seeing more and more of, it's less about the way things have always been done. And it's like, okay, maybe I would do that. And, Chris, I also am going to make a quick hot take that I'm not going to say it may be a little contrarian and controversial, but like I've heard a lot of people when I talk to about tech, some fire departments, they're like, oh, that sounds great, but like, you know what? My department would never do that. And I'm kind of like, well, why? And some of it's like, well, I don't know, our chief would never go for it. And one question I always have is like, they're like, well, our chief's been a chief for 20, 30 years. And sometimes I pause and question about like, again, so grateful for the fire chief service and so grateful for anyone that's served any amount of time in the fire service. But like, as we know, with different generations, whether it's boomers to Gen X to millennials to Gen Z to Gen Alpha, and now my son who was just born, Gen Beta, every generation is different. And the stuff we use is different. Like if we're not consistently learning, and if you don't have a fire chief that's consistently willing to accept that the market's changing, whether it's lithium ion batteries or solar powered fires, or the stuff around us is changing. Like if we don't change how we think to fight fires by introducing new stuff to combat these new things, like you're just setting yourself up for failure. And so I challenge any fire chief that's been there for 10 years. It's like, why are you still there after 10 years? This is maybe a controversial take. I think there should be term limits on fire chiefs to find ways. And I know they do in Europe, where after a certain time, the fire chief steps down and starts to kind of train the fire chief below them to continue to have this sort of hungry dynamic of learning the market. And I'm not saying that's always true. And I've talked to a few people who were like, that's a great idea. Some people were like, no, Kevin, you're crazy. So I'm not going to die on that sword, but I just want to challenge, and maybe someone could think I'm an idiot for saying this, but like, if you were a fire chief for more than a decade, you need, if and you're not kind of looking yourself in the mirror and saying, I don't know everything, and letting your BCs and your different lower tier to kind of tell you what we should consider to address these new evolving challenges, like, I just think that you need to consider it, because change is the only constant in this world, and we need to continue to fight some of these changes with new technologies. And my final point on this sort of mini soapbox rant, it's actually a point from the NextGen Tech Summit, but one of the technologies that blew my mind was from Full Circle Lithium. They lit a lithium-ion car battery on fire, and it was pretty crazy to watch it compared to combustible engine fires. They literally poked holes in this $75,000 Kia, and you just started to watch it go electrical EV fire crazy. And you're like, whoa, that's pretty wild. And you hear about all the challenges with you. Sometimes they take the car and put it in the 53-foot container and let it just kind of, soak out. Sometimes you're putting 10x the amount of water on it. But this company, and I saw with my eyes, like, instead of putting foam into the pump injector, they were putting this chemical solution. It's sort of fighting chemistry with chemistry. This chemistry solution makes the lithium inert and turns it into salt. And all of a sudden, this lithium ion car battery fire that would be a huge hazard was just like any other fire. And I was like, holy smokes, like that is a game changer, and we all need to consider that. And so I think we all just need to have that kind of curiosity mindset. I do believe curiosity is a winning mindset, whether it's in business or the fire service. And I just continue to challenge everyone that, again, if you're not changing and you're just relying on what we've done in the past, you're only setting yourself up for failure.
Well, I think you brought up an interesting point there, and it was when you were talking about the fire department that they said, "Oh, my chief will never go for that," and you said, "Why?" I think that question is critical for not only for you to say, well, why, because then you can kind of try to walk them through. But I've often thought that part of the challenge with some of these technologies is explaining the why behind the technology. Why is this important to you? Why will this help you be more efficient at your job? Why is it not replacing necessarily skills that you've already developed? It's that why that constantly, I think, trips people up. But I think you have to continue to ask it, even if you're the poor firefighter that's trying to push the change through. Just keep asking why. Why won't we do this? Why can't we do this? Why do you think the chief wouldn't? Has anybody asked the chief? Why hasn't anybody asked the chief?
There's the Freakonomics books, and those were very controversial in their own way, in terms of they were looking at one of their kind of first thesis was looking at why did gun crime reduce in New York City in the early 2000s, and there's all these stats. And again, I know this is kind of another controversial topic, but their thesis that went viral was gun crime reduced for the reasons that it was gun crime. They made it harder to get access to guns. They made it harder to, kind of stricter gun policies, but they also made abortion illegal, and they made abortion legal. And it kind of like was, again, this is maybe, I don't want to get too far on the topic, but they were kind of looking at all these other factors that reduced the gun crime dynamic. And it's sort of this sense-making perspective about asking why so many times till you can't ask why anymore. And when you ask why, and again, it's sort of having the other Freakonomics mindset is like, think like a freak, but also think like a kid. And thinking like a kid is having this undevout curiosity of asking why. I have a 7-week-old, and I can't wait till he starts asking why. And I'm sometimes just going to be like, well, just because, that's why. But I know that's not the case, because if we don't ask why, we're just going to kind of keep doing what we always do. But it is very important to ask that why, because then we can kind of start to think about, why are we doing things a certain way? And then also, if we're going to implement a new technology, why? Why should we implement this new technology? Is it going to save me time? Is it going to save me money? Is it going to save lives? And if it doesn't answer those questions, yes. And if it's not stupid simple, then the technology is garbage. It's irrelevant. don't waste your time. But if it does save you time, if it does save you money, if it does save lives, and it can be something that can be integrated with a little bit of change management, and change management's probably the hardest thing here, then that's an exciting technology proposition.
Before I let you go, I did want to talk about drones real quick. One of the points that you made in your LinkedIn was that I forget exactly how you put it, but they're not like a nice to have anymore. They're a need to have almost in fire departments. They're becoming ubiquitous. They're becoming part of the fleet. And there's just there are so many things that we haven't even scratched the surface on with drones yet they are becoming more and more a part of what we do. I've mentioned a couple of times during FDIC, during the podcast that I did, that my fire department, we have a very large industrial manufacturing facility in our first due. It's a 600,000 square foot facility. And back in February, we had a fire there. This was like the big one for us. I mean, we got there, the fire was through the roof. But very early on, one of the chiefs called the county and said, we don't have any in the fire department yet. I'm guessing this will change. But he had them dispatch the police department with their drones right away. And we got those drones up in the air. We could see, it gave us a chance this is a 600,000 square foot facility. It gave us a chance to see, what we absolutely just could not see from the ground. And that even if you put a ladder up, couldn't really get the perspective of what was involved in fire and just how it had grown. We used those drones for days after as well to hit hot spots. They had thermal imaging cameras on them, so we were able to find the hot spots. We were able to direct master streams and direct crews by using them to tell them where they needed to go. So I mean, like these case, to me that was the best use case I've ever seen for them, or one of the best use cases I've ever seen. But I mean, these case studies are coming up over and over and over again about how drones are being used right now. And in one of the podcasts that I did, they were talking about, deploying a drone at the point of dispatch so that, you're not relying on a chief getting there before the engine and doing a 360. That drone's going to get there long before the chief does. And they were talking about having these drones placed all over the municipality at different locations. You got the dispatcher, you got the pilot, and as soon as that dispatch goes out, they're sending the drone as well. And you're getting situational information even before the chief can get there, before that first due engine can get there, and you're starting your size up even earlier in the process. So just, I don't know. You had made that one comment in yours. I'm sorry. This is about you, not about me. But
no, it's about both of us,
really,
Chris.
to see it in action the way that I was able to recently. Not that I wasn't sold already, but it was like, wow. This is exactly why we're doing this. This is exactly why we're talking about this. Yeah. And you had mentioned it as well in your article on LinkedIn.
Well, I've had the fortune of being part of this working group, the IAFF and IFC drone working group, led by Coy Kessler and Fred Carlson and Jeff Pritchard and just Bobby Ortiz, just some of these amazing practitioners of drone and fire service. And again, I kind of assume that I know nothing, they know everything. I'm just a sponge, and so I'm just kind of regurgitating what I hear and what I'm seeing. And there's also a show, the Texas Robotics Summit, that happens in March. It is one of the best shows in terms of seeing, touching, feeling robotics in the field. And NIST is creating all these new kind of protocols about how to train on drones, how to deploy drones, air drones, land drones, water drones, again, the training needed around it. So all that. But to kind of take a step back too of, we were talking about, again, like you arrive on a scene and don't know what to do, and drones really unlocked it. When you said that, it reminded me of, I had the fortune of going to the Oklahoma City bombing memorial in December for the Technology Summit International, which was hosted in OKC this past year, and learning a lot about how first responders first got to the scene. And there was obviously this terrible bombing that happened, and everyone was like, hey, firefighters, go inside. But they were kind of like, there was this all this rubble and rebar, and they were like, well, we've never been trained on this. Like, what are we supposed to do? And how OKC bombing really led to this whole revolution of search and rescue and, modern day USAR. And so then that kind of has forced the hand of how to deal with the new change. And, again, now from that, we have to integrate new technologies, and obviously now drones being a big part of it, especially when you've got just like rubble and you've just got like these areas of where, post hurricanes, like when you've got to try and explore a mile, 5 miles, 25 miles, however many miles, it's really far and hard to do by foot when you're trying to go over debris and rubble. And I was talking with Kevin Swat, who's part of Mavis. He was mentioning that he was deployed for Hurricane Helene, and he was able to deploy a drone from his spot about a mile away to go and kind of see if there was everyone at his home. Before, he would have gone by foot and walked up there and walked back, and it would have taken like 3 hours. And he did that with the drone in a matter of like 20 minutes. And he was like, wow, I saved 3 hours. And again, it's not a drone. I saved 3 hours of time, and I checked the box that there's no one in that house. Like, that was cool. And so you're seeing these use cases of like, if you can save time, if you can prevent risk, and if you can just do your job better with the use of drones, why would you not? And you hear this in warfare. It's like, how can we create an unfair advantage over the enemy? And it's like, same with the fire service. If we can create an unfair advantage to do this job better than we did before, why would you not use drones? Especially when you don't want to risk, you can't even put a number on a human life, but you can put a number on a drone. That drone's 20 grand. That thing breaks, fine, we'll replace it. And so you're seeing cool use cases of drones. You mentioned deployed around the city. There's this big rise of drone as a first responder, DFR, and there's different types of DFR in terms of like whether you need a radar to deploy it or whether you need a VO to kind of look at it. But those are nuances. But the idea is that DFR drone takes off, and an operator that's at a location doesn't have direct eyes on it can fly it and go directly to the scene, and then be able to stream that video to the incident commander real time using softwares like DroneSense, being able to then, I'm a incident commander, I'm a battalion chief arriving on scene, I'm driving 10 minutes, and I now have a screen that's showing me the video of what's happening. So I can start to download and think of my game plan, like when I get to the scene, what exactly I'm going to do. And maybe there's a truck that's already ahead of me, so I can kind of communicate like, hey, make sure you kind of set up and you're on the Alpha Bravo side, and make sure that, again, just doing the pre-positioning and the little things, just to like, if we can create an unfair advantage of insights of data, why would you not do that? Another use case with DFR, you're seeing real-time crime centers being a big thing within law enforcement. And again, that's just taking all this data and, along with street cameras and all these different sensors within a smart city and allowing it to be in a dashboard. There's a police cop in Chicago named Lou Hayes, and I've just been soaking up all the stuff he posts about what is an RTCC, and it's definitely more law enforcement side, but everything fire service does is tied in there. One other use case of drones that's kind of just cool to think about is, I mentioned earlier, of a drone taking a photo for crowd size. How many people are in this crowd? Take a photo, throw it in the chat. There's a lot of really cool passive AI object detection you can do in drones, where if you just got a camera that's eyeing the sky and it's like, hotspot, boom, again, using infrared camera, and you're looking for a missing person in the field, all of a sudden, without you necessarily needing to spend a lot of cognitive bandwidth, the passive AI running can find a person, can find a hotspot, can detect a potential hazard of the erosion along this bank looks dangerous. Like, no one should stand by this dirt mound because that's about to go. So stuff like that, where it's creating new insights. And there's a lot of drone manufacturers, and there's a whole nother conversation that's an hour long, days long, about the drone restrictions and regulations and the whole, everything with the trade war going on. That's not where I'll comment on, but there's a lot of US and international drone companies that make great products that are, relatively affordable, that can do a lot of good for your departments. And, there are companies like Darley that are drone technology solution providers. And, final thing, I was building drones in the basement. I said this in my post, but I was building drones in the Darley basement in 2000, 2012 with Mike Masserino, and and we were hacking it together. And now there's hundreds of manufacturers that have gone through rigorous testing, and so platforms are stable and work. Of course, there's quadcopters, there's fixed wing, there's all these use cases. So there's also people I mentioned like Jeff Pritchard and Fred Carlson and Coy Kessler. They're all just like active first responders that are in it, and they're experts. And if you reach out to them, they will talk your ear off about drones and help get you set up in the right way. So, obviously reach out to me. I'm happy to sort of facilitate, because there are a lot of existing best practices. So this doesn't need to feel overwhelming. And I think maybe one thought I'll finish is that I've been rambling here about tech, and Chris, I appreciate the opportunity to talk, but with all this stuff, you got to just start small. That whole, how to eat a 500-pound gorilla. It's one bite at a time. If you try and do too many things at once, you're just going to get overwhelmed. But there's a lot of these new technologies that really can move the needle, and it's going to take 1 to 5 years. But, if you want to see positive change, it's totally doable, but you do need to be intentional about it. You got to take it one step at a time. You got to go to shows, you got to ask questions. So yeah.
Well, cool deal. Well, Kevin, again, my thanks for taking the time to sit down with me today. If there are questions about other types of technologies that Kevin and I didn't cover here today, let us know. You can reach me at chris.mcluhan@clarionevents.com, and I will be sure to get in touch with Kevin, and we'll set up another podcast to talk about that type of technology. To view all of the podcasts that we've done so far, they are all archived at fireapparatusmagazine.com/podcast. And if they're beyond technology, again, if there's any topic that we haven't hit on yet that you'd like to see us talk about, please feel free to contact me at chris.mcluhan@clarionevents.com. So again, this has been Chris McClune together with Kevin Sofen. Have a good one, everybody, and stay safe. Thanks again, Kevin.